Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining us live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the clash of civilizations, and this is the inspiration, I guess, for this essay is the book by that name, The Clash of Civilizations, written by Samuel P. Huntington, and it came out, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago, I suppose, and I read it probably not long after it came out, say 9 years ago, and so I've just sort of had a little reread of some of it. So, like anything that's courageous enough to forecast the future, it's some of its prognostications have come to pass, and of course many haven't. But nonetheless, it's people like Mr. Huntington and the work they put in that allows people coming after them to stand on their shoulders and produce new work on examining this very and very important topic. So now, just if you haven't read the book, I'll do a very sort of quick synopsis of it. It talks about effectively, it's about that since the fall of the communist bloc, so we're talking 1991. So there, since the fall of the communist bloc, nation states were defined by being pro or anti-communist, or within the communist orbit, or within the orbit of Western capitalism led by the United States. So there were those two groups. Now that to some extent had transcended or already transcended nationalism to a point at least. With the ending of the Cold War, then the nation state is unraveling both along ideological and national racial lines, is the argument, or one of the key arguments put forward in this book. What the author thinks will replace the nation state is civilizational regions, I suppose would be a way of putting it. So Islam is sort of put into a wider, so whether it be Sunni or Shiite, which is a little bit courageous, I think there, but that the wider Islamic sort of thing is put into one diaspora, tied together by religious faith, rather than by nation states. There's no real nation state that's sort of leading the pack in the. There may be one day, but now there isn't, nor was there one at the time of writing this book. And bear in mind, his research began something like 15 years ago. So, and I don't think anything's really changed there. The Islamic diaspora is held together by religion only, and that's a very powerful binding agent, by the way. So we shouldn't dismiss it as something irrelevant. It's not, far from it. The other civilizational grouping that is referred to in the book is the Chinese civilizational grouping. Now, the Chinese have often or frequently, if not always, have believed themselves to be civilizational more than national. And if we think that China, as we know it today, in terms of national boundaries, began really with just the one grouping within that region, the Han Chinese, that subjugated or absorbed, or took over, invaded, whatever you want to call it, all the other groupings in that region. Now, one of the arguments China puts forward today is that wherever their civilization has touched is Chinese in effect. It's the Sinic civilization. So wherever they have Chinese minorities, which are really all around Asia, and they typically tend to be the most well-to-do groupings in the areas. The Chinese and the Philippines are on average far better off and more well-to-do than the local natives. The same for say Malaysia and also Indonesia and so on around the place. So the Chinese claim to effectively, wherever their civilization has touched, wherever Chinese people there. That effectively is Chinese, and it's also a place that must pay homage and respect and kowtow, definitely show respect to China. And China perceived themselves as really the Middle Kingdom over history. So they were sort of, there was heaven above them, then there was China, and then there was the hoi polloi, sort of the barbarians elsewhere. Now, as fanciful as that may be, the Chinese, from a cultural perspective, which even fused with Confucianism, they believe that their destiny is to return to that sort of status as top dogs and head honchos of the world. And whilst not directly wanting to dominate others per se, you better show some respect and damn well pay tribute when we say so, which is really the equivalent of domination anyway, but with more of an emphasis on show us respect than, say, the Western traders or commercial people might have been. So there's that. Now there's an attempt in the book to see India as one in the Hindus, that is, as one collective diaspora. I don't really see that coming to pass. It possibly could, but not so far. Nor was it then. He's a little optimistic that might be the case in this book, but I don't see it happening. But who knows what's going to happen in another 50 years? But look, a lot of obstacles would have to be overcome before that was. But one thing that Mr. Huntington is very, very sort of sure about, and is that the West is in decline. Now, a lot can happen in 50 years, and just to illustrate the point, in the early late 1600s, European visitors to England thought that England was some vulgar outpost on the fringe of Europe. They would never amount to anything. The people were rude and had no class. They were vulgar and barbaric, and there was no way that England was going to become anything ever, and they just didn't have the juice to do it. Slightly over 50 years later, England was at war pretty much with the rest of the world, and won, and then at that stage became the world's foremost, or maybe sharing with France, the world's foremost superpower. So that happened in 50 years. Look at the reverse side of, again, Britain. In 1897, the British had a military parade, or where they paraded out of their navy, the most advanced in the world at the time, in Spithead, which is in southern England, and folks from all around the world came to look on at awe of the might of the British Royal Navy, and Britain was at the height of its power. It was actually in decline already at that point, but in 1897 it was still revered. It was held up as in America, even the press would say, well, what are the English doing? We need to do that, because that's the model for success and high achievement and so on. Yet less than 50 years later, Britain was the sixth richest country in the world. Even 10 to 15 years after that magnificent display, Britain had already dropped to third place behind Germany and the United States. So that's how quickly things can change. So things that today we think are set in stone, and trajectories that we think are going to, there's no doubt about it, China's going to be in charge, and any day now, that sort of thing. Doesn't mean it will come to pass. There have been all sorts of nations that have looked very promising and then have fallen to pieces, or they've quickly reached great heights but fallen just as quickly, and so on. So if we look at the time, as top dog that say the United States has had, then it may be one of the briefest empires in history, if in terms of total dominance that we've seen. So So this is the book, the civilizational thing, but the decline of the West, and it's universally across the West. It seems to be happening uniformly, which is again part of the globalist project. They want the West to be degraded and humiliated for their own ends. That they want, this idea of the political marketplace where the citizens have a say, the rule of law, the due legal process, all of that gets in the way of the globalist project, and they've got to get rid of it and crush it and just put it out there. And anyone disagrees is a damn white supremacist, fascist, Nazi. That's how they're sort of going about it, and they're going through education and through any means they can do it, and they don't care about the collateral damage. So without naming the globalists or suggesting that there's any particular group or grouping that's pushing this, the author just says, well, generally that there's less of a premium being placed on rigorous education, social capital, such as people's desire to perform charity work, that sort of thing is in decline. It's things, spiritual activities such as attendance at church and the like, or even leading a Christian lifestyle. All these things are declining, and as a result, all the building blocks of success for the West that made it rich and powerful and preeminent and technologically way in front of everyone else, that those things are all being lost and eroded and degraded, and so this will lead to the decline of the West. And I don't doubt, as a general thesis, I don't doubt that at all. I think we all can agree on where that's headed and what's being done. But the author doesn't necessarily prescribe remedies, and doesn't really put causes in there. For example, he talks about immigration, but for some reason, certainly like I'm not able to see, doesn't mention Ronald Reagan's effort at giving amnesty to millions of Hispanics that arrived in the United States legally, and how that opened the door then for floods of more illegals. He doesn't seem to have a cause and effect sort of scenario. He simply declares that the likely future of the world. Now, if we, the one civilizational thing that he sort of misses out is that white people have no civilization. Everyone else seems to have it, except for white people. So I'm not sure I agree with that, but the white civilization is being diluted. In Australia, just in just over 20 years, white people have gone from 97% of the population to 63. That's just how incredibly, that's how massive the immigration's been for people who don't want to integrate or assimilate, have no intention of it, and believe themselves to be morally and culturally and spiritually superior to white people. So they go, well, why should we integrate? And then their kids go to school here and they're taught that white people are bad and evil. White people did nothing but bad things. So it's just reinforced the view, well, why would we want to integrate? And by the way, these white people must be fucking useless if all they do is put themselves down. That lack of self-respect, that's they should be treated with contempt if they're so lacking in self-respect themselves. So this is the direction that the author sees it going, that the West will decline as much through self-inflicted wounds as anything else, and that's in an absolute and a relative sense. For example, as China modernizes and industrializes, because they've got such a huge population, they will begin to outproduce countries that of comparative technical competence, but simply nations or areas or diasporas that have fewer people. So the major groupings are going to be the Chinese, the Islamics, and the Indians, the author says. I think it'll be the Chinese and the Islamic, sort of the wider Islamic diaspora. But he writes white people off as really having no sort of culture. America's got no culture because it was kind of a melting pot of people from, all over the place, like, Poles and Russians and British and French and Germans and people from everywhere. So there's no actual culture there to protect. So and this perception that the West is not an ancient culture not in the sense of, say, China. It's not an ancient culture, therefore it effectively has no culture. And because of that, the nation state, when it erodes, then and religion's gone, or much less than it was, that means that the white people have to fall back on civilizational structure, which they don't have anyway. Therefore, they don't exist anymore in the new world. I mean, that wasn't directly expressed, but that's kind of where the argument heads. So, no, I don't think it's that bad. I think if we can stop the globalists from destroying the West, which they are, then we can turn this around. And the West has brought some wonderful things to the world, quite apart from technology. Now, the rule of law and due legal process, these sorts of things, independent courts. Now, democracy is a form of power sharing that suits and developed organically in the West, and I don't believe it suits every area of the world, or every diaspora, or every grouping, but it does work in the West, and wherever that sort of cultural development took place, then that form of power sharing could work quite well. The globalists are taking that away, and in fact, I think they've just about done it already. And we need to recover that as part of the West rejuvenating itself. But the outlook for the West is not good, and because it's being attacked so savagely by the globalists. Why aren't they attacking China as just as vigorously? I mean, look at the way the American administration treats China. They roll over and they're hopeless, and yet they'll be vicious and ruthless against their own people, and trying to chase teenage kids who defend themselves when faced with a Black Lives Matter riot and so on. So we've got work to do in the West, and I think based on the trajectory that the book appears to be suggesting for the West of decline, I think that is quite clearly is happening. Can it be arrested and stopped, and will the other cultures naturally assume a supreme position over the West? Because certainly with my travels, and I travelled extensively around the world on business, the views that they, in many corners of the world, they have of the West are not pleasant ones. They're happy to tolerate the West as long as the West is giving away a lot of free stuff. Then that's fine. They'll take the free stuff, but they won't. They won't embrace the West in any other context other than taking the money and the free stuff. And many are harbouring the time when the West won't be able to defend itself and they can get revenge. I just want to sort of highlight that the Chinese school curriculum teaches events that humiliated China more than 200 years ago, and or perceived as humiliating to China 200 years ago, and that they're thirsting for the time when they can get back at the white folks for that humiliation. Now you don't see in British schools, or Western schools, talk of things that happened 200 years ago, and let's get revenge for it. I mean, that would be absurd. But that's how some of these civilizational groupings are thinking, the Chinese and the Islamics. So we need to be aware of a situation where, when the West does lose its power and doesn't have a formidable military and doesn't have the financial clout to buy friends, when that power has passed, then those other groupings, the civilizational groupings, are going to want revenge, and they'll be able to take it at their leisure. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.